So it's a little after 4 a.m. on a full moon night, and I just went outside to see the full moon. It's quite clear and definitely full. This reminds me of the Dogen saying of moon in a dewdrop. And I've always wanted to talk about this expression. This is Dogen's, you can imagine he had an actual experience of maybe bending down to look at the dewdrops one day or one night under a full moon, and he noticed he could see the entire moon reflected in the dewdrop. And then it occurred to him that we are just like those dewdrops. So that his experience of being the entire universe, his consciousness expanding to the entire universe, or the entire universe contracting into his consciousness, very analogous to the entire sky and the entire moon being reflected in a dewdrop. So in this way, just simple observation of everyday things, you can see the fundamental teachings. But this book is very interesting as it's like a confluence of three traditions in the transmission of the Dharma to the West. So we have Dogen writing originally at 1250 AD, and then we have it being edited by Kazuaki Tanahashi, a Japanese living in America, working with many translators who were all against the painting of Dogen. Portrait of Dogen viewing the moon. So the translators are also in the, second generation, I guess, of Western Dharma teachers from the 50s to the 80s, maybe. Got Robert Aitken, Reb Anderson, Ed Brown, Norman Fisher, Arnold Kotler, Daniel Layton, Lou Richmond, David Schneider, Kazuaki Tanahashi, Catherine Thanas, Brian Unger, Mel Weitzman, Dan Welch, and Philip Whalen. Mel Weitzman was the abbot of Berkeley Zen Center, died a few years ago. Catherine Thanas was Santa Cruz Zen Center. Reb Henderson is San Francisco Zen Center. And Robert Aitken was in Hawaii, I think. Let's see, I only encountered Reb Anderson and Mel Weitzman attending sittings at their centers. Well, I might have seen Kazuaki Tanahashi. He gave a talk once at Berkeley Zen Center. But then, so the third connection is Gary Snyder, who was like, the key guy in the Beat Zen movement that he may still be alive. I checked a year ago. He's probably in his 90s. But he was portrayed by Kerouac in the book Dharma Bums as Jaffe Ryder. So he does the reading of selections from this, and originally I got the cassette tape version, and I just recently found it was republished on CD, and I got this off Amazon. But I stumbled on the cassette tape that was in Green Gulch, I think. I just wandered into the office bookstore and saw the cassette tape on the shelf, and I remember buying it back in the 90s. Then I would listen, converted it to MP3 and listen while I was commuting for 18 years, back and forth. I had like a 45-minute to an hour and a half commute, depending on traffic. So Gary Snyder reads the selections, and he had studied way back with Ruth Fuller Sasaki, who was the pioneer, lived in Japan, married a Japanese. And I have not read this, but she did a whole bunch of translations, with help from her students like Gary Snyder. And if I remember correctly, Suzuki Roshi studied with her, but I don't remember the dates. But Suzuki Roshi had some contact with a Westerner, and before he came over, I guess to get away from the Zen practice of just dealing with funerals and cremations in Japan. That's all Zen teachers were asked to do, I guess. So I have Gary Snyder reading this section that I like. Is Yuibutsu Yobutsu, Only Buddha and Buddha. Let's see if I can start it up and just play the first couple of minutes. It has a nice opening.
On the endeavor of the way.
Let's see. Bendoa. Here we go.
Then you are cautious not to be small-minded. If realization came forth by the power of your prior...
Okay, let's start it.
Only Buddha and Buddha. Yuibutsu Yobutsu. Buddha Dharma cannot be known by a person. For this reason, since olden times, no ordinary person has realized Buddha Dharma. No practitioner of the lesser vehicles has mastered Buddha Dharma. Because it is realized by Buddhas alone, it is said only a Buddha and a Buddha can thoroughly master it. When you realize the Buddha teachings, you do not think, this is realization just as I expected. Even if you think so, realization invariably differs from your expectation. Realization is not like your conception of it. Accordingly, realization cannot take place as previously conceived. When you realize Buddha, Dharma, you do not consider how realization came about. You should reflect on this. What you think one way or another before realization is not a help for realization. Although realization is not like any of the thoughts preceding it, this is not because such thoughts were actually bad and could not be realization. Past thoughts in themselves were already realization. But since you were seeking elsewhere, you thought and said that thoughts cannot be realization. However, it is worth noticing that what you think one way or another is not a help for realization. Then you are cautious not to be small-minded. If realization came forth by the power of your prior thoughts, it would not be trustworthy. Realization does not depend on thoughts, but comes forth far beyond them. It is helped only by the power of itself. Know then that there is no delusion and there is no realization. When you have...
So that is an interesting opening, especially for us Westerners who sometimes come to the, like me, thinking, hey, I got this all figured out, man, this makes sense. You know, I had all these theories, especially if you study quantum physics for any time, like I did for 10 years, having majored in physics and then switched to philosophy. You think you have all these theories about enlightenment. But it is worth noticing that what you think, one way or another, is not a help for realization. Then you are cautious not to be small-minded. So when you finally, or break through, or have kensho, or realization, you don't think, oh, this is just as I expected it. Even if you think so, that realization invariably differs from your expectation. Realization is not like your conception of it. Accordingly, it cannot take place as you previously conceived. So what you think, one way or another, before realization is not a help for realization. If realization came forth by the power of your thoughts and conceptions, it wouldn't be trustworthy. Realization doesn't depend on your thoughts, but comes forth far beyond them. Realization is helped only by the power of realization itself. So there is no delusion and no realization. And then he talks about something else that appeals to the science person, about consciousness extending through the entire universe. It is not an artifact of little algorithmic machines crunching away in the brain. Consciousness is primary. It is the field extending throughout the universe, beyond space and time. So an ancient Buddha said, the entire universe is the true human body. The entire universe is the gate of liberation. The entire universe is the eye of Vairochana. The entire universe is the Dharma body of the Self. Know that the entire universe is your own true body, which is not a temporary body. See, this is the good news, I guess. The gospel of Zen is your true body is not a temporary body, subject to birth and death. So then he says, learn that the entire universe is the Dharma body of the Self. To seek to know the Self is invariably the wish of living beings. However, those who see the true Self are rare. Only Buddhas know the true Self. What Buddhas call the Self is the entire universe. Therefore, there is never an entire universe that is not the Self, with or without our knowing it. On this matter, we defer to the words of the ancient Buddhas. Indeed.